Now, there are a number of costs that you need to understand that come with building a secondary home or even just a small home. I find a lot of people just don't really talk about it. They're just sort of saying, yeah, you know, buy my product for whatever, 100,000, 150,000. And there's a lot of costs that they don't talk to you or explain, and you don't want to get caught out thinking that, oh yeah, that's my total cost. And it's also why people, I think, oh, you know, building costs so much more than what I imagined, and they lose a bit of trust in their builder. So I just want to talk about some of these that is really important for you to know. First of all, survey. Now, a site survey is most often required, and it's because we're trying to fit a secondary home or a small home on perhaps a small site, and the council has setbacks, and we want to make sure that we're adhering to all those setbacks. The way for us to be approved, to show that we're actually adhering towards all those setbacks and the requirements, is to get a site survey done, which actually plots the boundary of your property. More often than not, we find that, you know, you might have fences and that around your boundary, and you think, yep, that's on the boundary, and more often than not, they're not. They're like 100 or 200 mil off. So number one, site survey. More often than not, you need to get it, and they cost normally about $1,100 with the guys that we use. Next thing is soil test, footings, and wind rating. Each property has different types of soil. That means that the footings that you need to put into the soil, quite often they can be at different levels. So you could have a standard soil and, you know, they only need to go down 1,500 deep, or quite often you need to go deeper to find bedrock. You'll always need to have a soil test and a footings design, and also a wind rating. This is typically done by a geotech engineer, and we're finding this is costing about $800. Next thing is whether you're on a flat or a sloping block. When you're building on a sloping block, it's always going to be more costly than a flat block. People will often say to you, yes, I'll provide you a secondary dwelling, it's going to be X dollars. They always mean on a flat block. And quite often when you're on a sloping block, you'll have what we call a landslip overlay over the top of your property, which means that you need to get an engineer. And the engineer's report, typically what I'm finding is around about $1,200. And often this will also include the soil test, so there can be some savings there when you do all of this together. Also, if you're on a sloping block, we're finding that construction costs around about an additional $10,000. The reason for that is you've got additional subfloor steel posts obviously going onto your slope, if you can imagine, and also the cost of the scaffolding that's required while constructing, the hire of the scaffolding. And also it means that you need balustrading, of course, around all your decks, where typically, you know, if you're on a flat block, you don't need to balustrade. Bushfire zone. Now, there's a lot of properties that are within a bushfire zone. If you're unsure whether you are or not, you can always call your council or call a town planner or us, and we can find out for you. If you are in a bushfire zone, you will always need a report written by a bushfire consultant. The report is around about $500 to $700, depending on the size of your block. Then construction can vary quite rapidly if you are also in the higher bushfire zone. So I'll just give you an example. We had one home shack that we were building in one area down near Byron Bay, and it's not in a bushfire zone. That was costing about $155,000 all up. Now the exact same shack that was being built in Wurrunggeri, in a really high, what we call a Bell 40 rating, which is like a really high bushfire rating, instantly jumped up $40,000. Obviously, you know, it's significant, and it's really important to get this bushfire report here, and that will help you to understand how much extra it's going to cost. Now, the reason why it's going to cost more is all in the building materials, right? So everything has to be fire rated. So it just means thicker materials. One of the most significant costs are actually in the glass, the thickness of the glass of the windows and the sliding doors. Then septic. So as you know, a lot of properties are either on town water and sewage, or they're on, if they're in a rural zone. If you're in a rural zone, you will often have a septic tank. Now, if you've already got an existing septic tank, you know that you'll have to get a report done to see whether that existing septic tank is going to have enough volume there in order to cater for another 1 or 2 bedrooms for your secondary dwelling. So the report we're finding is costing around about $600. We get a hydraulic engineer out to do that. They'll then advise whether you need an additional septic tank. So in other words, keep your existing septic tank for your existing home and then have an additional septic tank for your new second dwelling. Or another option is that you just get rid of the old one and you put a whole new one in place. So typically, if you're going to get a new one for a 1 or 2 bedroom shack, they're costing about $7,000 to $10,000. Or if you want to get rid of the existing one and put a whole much larger one, they're around, I've seen them around 14 to 15K. Next thing is I want to talk about the building approval versus development approval. So we call them BA, which is building approval, and DA for development approval. All homes have to have a building approval by Australian standards and the National Code. So you'll always have a building approval, but you don't necessarily always need a development approval. Development approval is when you need a council approval, essentially. Getting to the building approval, you always need it. It's typically about $2,000 to $3,000, I'm finding, and it should always be included in your build cost, right? And it's something also that the builder will organise for you, all right? You shouldn't have to organise that for yourself, and it should be included already. So just make sure it is. And the next thing, of course, is the development approval. We're finding with our town planners, it's costing about $3,500 all up, and that will include the town planning fee and the council fees. I have found that some town planners, they're charging anything between $1,200 and $4,000 for their service. So if you want to give us a ring, if you're not sure about a town planner, we're happy to put you in front of our town planners and see what they can do for you. So if you have any more questions or on anything about these topics that we've covered today, give us a ring and we're more than happy to help you. I mean, there's a lot here obviously to take in, and perhaps you're a little unsure about which one of these will affect you, or maybe even none of them affect you. So the first thing though is important is to give us a ring and then we'll let you know.